We are live. You can go ahead, Odes.
Welcome everyone. We'll be starting our conference in a few seconds. The time to allow everyone in. Just to remind those who are already in that we are going to be discussing the topic measuring running security in Sub-Saharan Africa from evidence to action. We expect more people to join. I will introduce the conference. Probably, first of all, I will introduce myself. My name is Odas Kugimana. I'm the regional coordinator for the International Coalition, Africa coordinator. I want to, first of all, thank you for joining. And I want to remind you that this conference is organized in partnership with Prindex and the Global Land Alliance and IPAR Senegal, because we have a partnership to promote land data for advocacy in Africa. And the conference is mainly informed by the Prindex Global Report that was just launched recently at global level, and that we are going to be launching at regional level today during this conference. We'll come back to this report that Dr. Ibrahimaka will present in more details. But as you will see, findings from the report calls for some serious actions if we want to see more secure land rights in our various countries. We'll also have the chance to hear from different other speakers, bringing in different perspectives. We'll hear from other RAN data tools operators. We'll hear actors from national, continental, and global levels. They'll be telling us about how measuring RAN security can contribute to improved RAN security. So these are the, in short, things that will be discussed in the next 2 hours that will be staying together today. Before I invite our guest of honor to open the conference for us today, I want to mention that we have a very tight agenda and packed agenda, and therefore we will need to use our time very wisely. I will ask participants to use the question and answer box for any questions. And this is where I will be checking all the questions that will be shared with panelists for answers. So for any questions, use the question and answer. And for anything else, use a chat box. So if you put your question in the chat box, it will not be addressed. So for questions, please use the question and answer box. Now, I want to introduce Ms. Esther Obaiko. She's coming from IGAD. IGAD is our long-standing partner. We work a lot with IGAD in promoting people-centered governance in the East African region, and we are honored to have IGAD with us today in this conference, and IGAD has accepted to also open our conference today. Esther has been working in this sector for the last 23 years, and she's quite known in the land sector in the region. Esther is with us today, and she is going to be making opening remarks on behalf of IGAD to open this conference. Esther, over to you.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, for those using French, please, there is interpret translation service. You can choose French if you want to listen in French, and those using English, you just select English. Is that okay, Ryan?
Yes, that's perfect. Just to say, everyone should select one or the other. So if you want to hear this in English, please select English. If you want to hear this in French, please select French. Thank you.
Okay. Over to you, Esther. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Odes, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Many familiar faces, of course. Some old friends, some new acquaintances, but it's good to be here. As already introduced, I'm Esther Obaiko, been in the land sector for forever. Maybe that's the best way to put it, in different capacities. But I'm really honored to be here today and to open this up. Thank you, Odes, for the invitation. Thank you, Global Land Alliance and IPAR for putting this together. I'm personally so connected to land monitoring. As you all might know, I worked for the Global Land Indicators Initiative before, and gave birth to many from no land data to a bit more of land data to work with globally, but also in Africa. This is to thank you all and for all those who have joined and participated in the collection of data and preparation of the report. Just to say that at IGAD, we partner with the ILC to do so many things, and so far, I think so good. We are breaking new ground and handling a lot of events together, but also moving towards really more solid work on people-centered land governance on the continent, which we find very important, particularly our role of connecting governments with civil society. Creating that space for that to happen is very meaningful because the two have been working in parallel. So my role in this place is to make sure that that connection happens. And therefore what you're launching today actually speaks into what we do at IGAD, which is basically making the connection between actors and multi-stakeholder processes. People think it's easy, it is not. I can assure you that it is not, and we are very committed to that. Given that we a child, should I use that word, of the Africa Union Commission, we of course have a commitment to implement the MELA framework, which is the overarching framework that was passed by the AUC for land monitoring. So it will be very interesting to see how all these other land monitoring processes can all come together at regional level to enable us play a role in fostering member states' capacity to utilize, for us it's more utilize the information that has been collected by the various actors. We really look forward to that, and we look forward to results like this to inform our member states. Right now we are in a learning event around women and land, gender and land, and one of the issues emerging is how can we ensure that results from research monitoring data can be translated into policy and into practice. And we find ourselves in that role to make that connection and that a reality for member states, but also to draw in other actors who might be interested in supporting member states to implement. As you all know, for land, the final service deliverer is a government. So we cannot not do without them. We need them as our allies to make sure that our results come alive in practice. And so we really look forward to this launch and to the report. And if there are issues that we need to take up at regional level, we are very happy to do that and to support the cause moving forward. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome all to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. I think the audience has just heard how rich is your experience in this sector, and I was very shy to even talk about it as a baby in the sector. And I just took away the interest to utilize the information from such a tool or report to utilize information and improve or achieve land security in the region. And this is actually the purpose of the whole work that Prindex and other similar tool operators are doing. And I think that's really interesting to hear from you. Without spending too much time, I will go to the next panelist, who is Dr. Ibrahimaka. Dr. Ibrahimaka is going actually as the very first panelist now that the conference is opened by IGAD. Dr. Ka, who is currently actually, as he usually says, he is wearing 3 caps. He's working for, he's a NEPAD employee, but he's also working for ELC Africa, and he's also in charge of Prindex. So he's in charge of this partnership that has been established between Global Land Alliance, ELC Africa, and IPAD. So basically, he's working for Global Land Alliance, ELC Africa, and IPAD. So he has this cap. This cap. He's in charge of Prindex at Africa level. So Dr. Ibrahimaka will be taking us through this report, and he will tell us basically about key findings from the report, but he will focus mainly on Sub-Saharan Africa, because the report is covering several countries worldwide. Ibrahima, over to you.
Thank you, others. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
And do you hear the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, others. Thank you, Esther, and thanks for all the speakers and discussants, and also the audience. It's a pleasure having you on board on that data conference on measuring land insecurity in the Sub-Saharan Africa region. Without further ado, allow me to share with you some findings from the 2020 Prindex Global Comparative Reports and highlight key findings that speaks for our region. As you may know, the Global Property Right Index, Prindex, is a joint initiatives of the Overseas Development Institute, ODI, and the Global Land Alliance, and appears as a global land monitoring tool, which is exclusively focusing on land security perceptions through nationally representatives survey of adults. And by conducting the global survey on more than 140 countries, for the first time, land community actors have on their hand a unique and robust land monitoring tool that offers an internationally comparative measure of perceived tenure security and a global data set that quantifies land and the property insecurity and allow comparability between countries. What do we want to achieve with this? First of all, perception matter a lot in the land sector. Perception is an input to decision making. It can influence behaviors. The feeling about the land security can lead to some decision and can have some social, economic, and environmental consequences. If a farmer fears that his land will be sized down or taken over before the coming harvest, for example, he or she is less likely to invest in improvements on that land for year to come. And that's why the aim of the Prindex is to influence change in design of national policies and programs related to land, but also implement to help to monitor impact of those policies and programs, and also contribute to tracking SDGs, and Malcolm will elaborate later on that. This year, as Oda said, we were able to release the 2020 Global Comparative Report, and I hope you guys will have access to it through internet. Paul or Ryan can share it on the chat box. 140 countries was surveyed worldwide, and discovered almost 96% of the global population. And out of all those countries, we have 34 from the region. And the main question of the Prindex is that one. In the next 5 years, how likely or unlikely is it that you could lose the right to use this property or part of this property against your will? Very unlikely, somewhat likely, and very likely. And what we have in terms of result at the global level is nearly 1 in 5 adults feel insecure in their land or property right. This is big. Almost 1 billion people feel globally insecure, and the rates varies by region. For the Sub-Saharan Africa region, we have those findings that can be highlighted. First of all, we try to break down the result per different category. Where people feel, where are the region where people feel most insecure? Levels of perceived insecurity varies by region. It ranges from the lowest in Europe. You guys can see at the left, at the top left. Varies from the lowest in Europe to the highest in the Middle East, and the global average of insecurity is 20, while in Africa or the Sub-Saharan Africa region, the average is 26, and this also varies per regions. But also in a country, we can notice some variation, and later on, Professor Taibert will elaborate more on that, on how they are capturing local dynamics in Nigeria. Here are the distributions, the distribution of the insecurity in all countries that are surveyed, and we have some extremes. In the lowest country where we notice, the country where we notice the lowest rate is in Rwanda. Maybe others will tell us why Rwanda is the country where people feel mostly or more secure, 8%, and then the extreme is in Burkina Faso with 44%. I think the main question is why people feel secure and why people don't feel secure. We will talk about later on that. This security also can be breakdown in terms of type of security. Owners, between owners, renters, and family owners. What we notice is owners are about twice as insecure as the global average, but renters are still the most vulnerable group by far. And you guys can see the renters are on the top, ranging from 44 to 41 to 34. And we see also the renters in the East and Central Africa feel most insecure. Across the region also, renters are most insecure, owner are the most secure. This is something also true. And the family owners are in between. This graph speaks well on that. We can also break the result or the data per location, rural versus urban. What we see is more than 1 billion people are predicted to be living in Africa cities and towns by 2015. By 2050, this will intensify pressure on land, potentially exacerbating tenure insecurity. But people living in towns and cities are more likely to feel insecure than those living in rural areas. We can also have an open discussion on that. On age, we can also have the break down the data per age, and what we see, and I know maybe Yila people are watching us, Innocent, they can elaborate more on that, to see that younger people tend to be more insecure. This is also something true, and young people are more likely to live in rental accommodation and or suffer from financial hardships, meaning that their levels of insecurity are considerably higher than those of older generations. Coming to gender, Esther will comment on that, how data can advance the women land right advocacy. She will also touch on the issue of land insecurity for women that is likely to get worse in the events of death or divorce, death of the spouse or divorce. Situation of women in accessing to or controlling over land is a bit complicated in all the regions, in all parts of the world, but it is more complicated in Africa. And you guys can see this graph. The regional average is higher than the global average, and the situation also varies per regions. And if the situation is lower in East Africa, it is higher in West Africa. Now the issue of documentation. Here we have documentation and security. I think this is the main question behind is handing out titles, deeds enough to ensure security? This is a pivotal question on land security researches, and I know Ward can elaborate more on that. This reignites the debate about the economics of land tenure, regularization, and titling. Many see formal land rights as key to economic growth, agricultural production, food security, natural resource management, reducing gender-related inequalities, conflict management, or other positive development processes. But the situation is, although the description analysis of the Prindex data set does not infer a causal relationship between formalization and perceived tenure security, there is a noticeable difference in the relationship between the two variables in the Sub-Saharan Africa region compared to the other regions. In many countries, especially in that region, not having a deed does not lead automatically to insecurity, and as there are customary tenure systems that confer feelings of security of tenure without formal documentation. And then at the same time also, having a title deed does not ensure security or serenity if the legal and registration system are not capable of protecting the right that are documented. We can have also, I think, an open discussion about it. Now, the reason why people feel insecure, we have a lot of reasons, right? They from owners asking people to leave, the hardship of life, lack of money and other resources. And I think with the context of COVID, the situation can get worse. And then also the disputes within families and relatives. And then the third, the last position, the government also can be a threat for the right of people. Now, the use of data, as I said, the database is available, and the Prindex team is putting together infographics. And I kind of ask you to maybe visit the website and download the infographic that correspond to your country. Also, another use of the Prindex data is this article of the journalist of The Economist from John McDermott.
Brahima, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, it's a nice article on a case for secure property right in Africa. So I will use those 2 minutes to tackle the next steps. Right now, as I said, we are doing deep dives to try to capture local dynamics, and Professor Taibat will tell us about what we are doing in Nigeria, around Lagos and the suburb. But also we are collecting, or we are going to collect data in Burkina Faso. We are partnering with regional and national levels researchers. We are also committed to regular updates of this baseline data, and then we will engage some specific researches on conflict, violence, insecurity, climate change, gender. I think from next year we will have some studies in Benin, in Cote d'Ivoire, and then also on that issue of traditional and customary right versus statutory right. Thank you, others on Jaramo.
Okay, thank you, Brahima. I think you use your time very well. I think one thing that attracted my attention is a very alarming figure: 1 million people worldwide feeling insecure. That's I think a huge number, and a lot of people in Africa, very huge percentages in different sub-regions of insecure people, although this differs from sub-region to sub-region. There are questions in the Q&A which you could answer by typing answers, but some of them could also be answered live later. But please go to those questions and type answers wherever you can, and some will be picked for live answers later. But for the moment, I think we'll follow the plan and proceed with the next panelist, who is our friend from IGAD, from the African Union. Wait. Sorry. No.
It's Clement.
Yeah, it's Clement, but I'm trying to find, okay, sorry. I had lost my screen. Yeah, so we are going to hear from Dr. Clement Ajororo from NEPAD. He's the principal program officer and land data scientist at the African Union Development Agency. He's implementing the land governance project with a study on collection of data and establishment of LANDesk on land governance. The study is undertaken in 10 countries, both Francophone and Anglophone countries. He will tell us about the data perspective in Africa from his position at continental bodies such as AUDA-NEPAD. Clement, over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And I want to say good afternoon to the esteemed participants and all on the platform. I wanted to give a PowerPoint presentation on the data as aspect of the AUDA-NEPAD program on land governance. I'm not sure which of my screens is showing right now. If you can confirm with me, what do you see? I am currently sharing my screen.
Yes, we see a screen.
Is it a presentation?
NEPAD's role in strengthening national data systems and policy analysis.
All right, that's good. Okay, so my name is Clement Ajororo. I'm currently head of the agricultural unit at the AUDA-NEPAD. Under the agriculture unit, we also have the land governance program. So I will share with you. Screen is not moving. So I am trying to share my screen, but it's not moving on my side.
It's moving. It was moving. Yeah, okay. It was moving.
All right, let me try it again. There we go. All right. So I just want to start by giving just a brief background on why the land issue is very important in the African context. As many of you or all of us know, that Africa is such a vast continent, one that many other continents fit into, or countries can fit into it. However, the narrative of Africa is always not a very good one when it comes to our economic development, our poverty levels, our security and insecurities. So the way in which we really tackle the land issue will be very critical for our aspiration to attaining the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, and similarly the land-related targets of the Global Sustainable Development Goals. You will appreciate that common to the land governance issues across the continent will be weak data systems and also complex processes that govern land security of tenure, rights, and ownership. But also we will have to, in hindsight, acknowledge that some of the driving forces will include demand and competition for the land from various sectors, including agriculture. We saw from the presentation from Ibrahima the disparity or the difference between urban and rural dynamics. We also have to take a note of the other sectors like your mining and conservation, and also just a lot of conflicts that emanate across the country also are linked to the land. So given this background, the African Union really challenged its institutions and government to really translate some of the principles and declarations that have been made into actionable programs and projects on the ground. So in response to that, we have the AUDA-NEPAD land governance program, which part of it is to develop and apply instruments and institutional arrangement that will really help member states and the general public in strengthening awareness of the importance of good governance in the land sector, and also strengthening the analytical capabilities of institutions to identify priority areas, develop evidence that will also combine with performance monitoring in the land sector. We, as part of the program, are also strengthening instruments and providing capacity that will enable countries to put in place data repositories for land, on land specifically. We are also involved in strengthening capacity to prepare policy notes, analysis required for national policy dialogues, and also the sector planning and investment plans that with the member states that we are working with. We are setting up land helpdesk currently in a set of countries to be able to collect data on land and also have a good repository of that data set. Those land helpdesks are currently being anchored in the land ministries or nominated institutes within the countries. So the requirement for establishing the helpdesk include 3 areas. One is the institutional and the human capacity assessment that we looked at. We look at the legitimacy of the host institution for to host the initiative. We also look at the interdepartmental data related issues that need to be addressed and the coordination within the country. We also are in supporting the physical infrastructure and the software requirements for the platform or the repositories to be able to be installed in the countries for their own management. And then we also deal the issue of access to the data and the procedures and come up with a handbook that really guide on how member states handle land-related issues. So coming to what is the function of this helpdesk that we are putting in the member states, we look at the helpdesk as a very coordinating and central to the various value chain or the role players in a country. We look at the data ecosystem in a country and said the helpdesk liaise with the regulators, the producers, and those who use the data, and then the analysts in particular, and those who add value to data in order to produce knowledge, and then the dissemination of data. And basically, we look at the 3 types of data sets that will include your survey, sensors, and other data, including even satellite data. We look at the administrative data that is required for land decision making, and then we also working to get the macroeconomic or economic data that will also be integrated into the whole analytical capability. So currently, the initiative is in 10 African countries, as shown on the map to my right, if it's, I think to your right as well. The countries will include the Mali, Burkina Faso, Benin, Ghana, Cameroon, Namibia, Botswana, Madagascar, Uganda, and Ethiopia are involved in a project that is collecting the 3 sets of data sets and building capacity on managing the data. And once we have this in place, we ensure that there will be emphasis in establishing a good land governance in countries. And this is not an isolated initiative, but there are several other initiatives in the countries that we are aware of. We are also working with the member states then to ensure that there is clear alignment to all the different initiatives. Currently, what has been done is that we have developed the e-platform that allows the member states now to be able to house the data and have control of the data and make sure that data that goes into the portal is authoritative, it's authentic, and is well validated by member state structures before it is published and made available. Member states will have the full control about what gets published and who have access at what level of data. So all the different levels of access to the data that is being. So in conclusion, I just wanted to highlight that the initiative is really looking at the data aspect, building capacity for analytical tools, how to use the tools, and how to really make sure that the data goes into the policy planning process. And also there is a general access to data by the by general public on knowing what is this that is happening on a piece of land or an area. That information is going to be available or it's been made available to the public. There is capacity development for mainstreaming of the land governance in other sectors, planning, and it's also providing a platform for knowledge sharing. And also we are then working with the member states to be able to mobilize the necessary resources that are required for them to be able to run. So briefly, this is what I have to share with you on what AUDA-NEPAD is doing in assisting member states to collect data so that when it comes to reporting at the continental level, we have now built the necessary capacity that is required. Often member states have made declarations and have agreed on mutual accountability, but you have to really train, you have to build the capacity before you evaluate member states. So this is one of the initiatives to say if member states have to report on their progress that they are made in the land sector, you also have to make sure that you capacitate, you build the capacity that is necessary for them to collect good data and be able then to do analysis and report back on the, be it the insecurity status of land or any other land related indicators that is required at the continental level. Mr. Moderator, I will then stop here and then invite questions. And I will, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kremen. You have exactly used your time very well. I was about to tell you that you have only 30 seconds remaining. I think it's very interesting to hear that a continental body is also working on run data and assisting member states to build their capacities on data collection, especially on RAND. And as we have seen and as we will see, all this is done in order to for the main purpose to improve or to achieve land security at the end. So I think the different actors contributing to information on land security on the continent will help to improve on this improve this very I think concerning figures that we just saw from Ibrahima's presentation. I have seen a few questions in the chat. We will have a slot for answers, but before that, I will invite the next panelist, and that is Dr. Ward from the International Coalition Secretariat. Ward is also running another RAN data tool, which is called LANDex. So he's a development economist and policy analyst, a research fellow at the Agricultural Research Center for the International Development, CIRAD. He's presently seconded to the International Coalition as the senior technical specialist responsible for knowledge, running, innovation, and data. So we deliver on how LANDex, the Global Land Governance Index, an IRC dedicated land monitoring tool, is using index data as a methodology. At East Africa, we consider them as twin tools. And Ibrahima is in charge of promoting both within East Africa platforms. So, Dr. Ward, over to you.
Thank you, Das. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I will share my screen so that you can follow my presentation. There we go. Can you see it, Das?
Sorry, yes, I see it.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. As Oda said, I will present to you another tool, LANDex. But as you will see from my presentation, LANDex does not want to reinvent the wheel. LANDex uses and is aligned to many of the other initiatives Esther and Ibrahima have talked about. So I entitled the presentation LANDex, Prindex, and all the other global frameworks, including the SDGs, the VGTs, MELA, etc. And what LANDex does within this global frameworks is promoting people-centered data. So my outline will be just 2 points that I will detail. The first one, to present you what LANDex is. And the second one, the relationship between LANDex, Prindex, SDGs, and these other frameworks. So let me start with my first point. What is LANDex? So LANDex is a global land governance index that puts people at the center of land data, democratizing land monitoring and building a data ecosystem where all voices can be heard. We do not speak or we do not promote only people-centered data, we promote an ecosystem, but within this ecosystem, we try to accentuate, to focus on people and on the situations where people live in and the land tenure systems where people live in order to democratize and to give everybody, whether it's people-centered data, whether it's academic data, whether it's government data, etc., the same voice. So what is LANDex? It's a tool, it's a monitoring tool that promotes a common set of indicators to support efforts to gather data according to these indicators, to embrace a data ecosystem with priority given to people-centered data. The aim of LANDex is to develop an alternative land monitoring system that is recognized as legitimate within the global framework. We've done a lot of efforts, you will see at the end, of aligning and of adjusting so that it becomes a legitimate tool at global, but also at regional and national level. and which allows us to shed light on land governance from and with underrepresented sectors of the population. As you know, many of the data systems, especially the administrative data systems, give only lights or shed light on particular tenure systems. That's mainly private ownership. In this endeavor, we try to shed light on all type of ownerships and on all type of people, which includes, of course, women, indigenous peoples, locals, communities, but also youth, etc., which often are blurred or packed in one group. The rationale of LANDex is to contribute to and go beyond the SDGs, the VGTs, the MILAs, etc. All these are very relevant, but because they're global frameworks and because they're much broader and cover a lot of other aspects, they tend to minimalize, not MILA as such, but as the SDGs particularly tend to minimalize land per se, or the different aspects, the different scopes of land. And what we're trying to do is to broaden up the different scopes, as you will see, and also to broaden up the scope of sources that we use, from people-centered up to government data. And so to do that, we do not want to reinvent the wheel, as I said, and reinvent data. We draw on existing initiatives and on the wealth of information, informants, and data that is already out there. There's a lot of information. The previous speaker said it already. What we try to do is to bring all this together. And we could have done different systems. We could have just brought them together in a platform and develop an ecosystem. But what we wanted to do here is to do something intermediate is by identifying a set of indicators and use the existing data, or most of the existing data, to fill these indicators. So how have we done that? When we started this initiative now, almost 5 years ago, the first year was dedicated to a consultative process that took 12 months at different levels, from global up to regional, up to national level. We went through the network of the International Land Coalition through an extensive consultative process, trying to identify which were these indicators that we should retain to cover at best the land sector. And we came up with 33 indicators that cover 10 thematics from 1 to 10. It goes from secure tenure rights to diversity of tenure rights, to gender, to indigenous peoples and local communities rights, to ecosystems, to inclusive decision-making, transparency about land, effective actions against land grabbing, but also land right defenders, etc. These 10 thematics are covered according to 3 levels. The first level in yellow is a legal level. So is this aspect, this thematic, included in your legal system at country level? The B, the gray, the light bluish level, is the implementation. So if it exists in your law, in your constitution, is it effectively implemented and through which means? And then C is the outcome, the results, and the impact level, the gray bottom level, where we see if it exists and if it is implemented, what are the impacts on the ground. And whereas the global levels are often the SDGs, VGTs, etc., including MILA, are often covering the A level and the B level here, what we think the added value of this tool is certainly the C level, where we assess the impact as well. According to, well, beyond these 33 indicators, and to respond to these 33 indicators, we developed, or we gathered through this process, 4 types of methodologies. As I said, we promote people-centered data. These are the yellow boxes. These 17 indicators here are informed by people-centered surveys. The gray ones are 9 calculation indicators. For these ones, we use mainly state data or government data through NSOs and through the line ministries that we reuse to respond to the indicators we identified. And then the blue ones, there are 6 survey-based indicators. These are indicators that depend on global surveys. And Prindex, as you will see, is one of them. As I said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We use whatever exists, and that is solid. And then we use it in order to respond to our indicators. I will come back to that with regards to Prindex. And then lastly, there's one crowdsourced indicator, which is 10C, which is looking at harassments of land rights defenders. So what is it concretely? It's an online platform. You can visit it. It's www.landexglobal.org, which gives you a global, but also national indexes regarding land governance. As I said, global and then national. Here, for example, I'm not going to go through the specific countries and the specific results for these countries. It would be too much time. But here we have, I think this was Senegal. And according to these 10 thematics, you can identify and you can see how this particular country scores according to these thematics. Here you can then go into detail, see how a certain country, this is again Senegal, does for certain thematics, like for example, secure tenure rights. Senegal scores a 53, which is just above the average global score. But for example, on diverse tenure systems, Senegal is not scoring well, only a 25 out of 100, which is far beyond global averages. Same for secure territorial rights for indigenous peoples, effective actions against land grabbing, etc. Here is again Senegal. This can then be used as a very detailed tool to see a disaggregated level where how Senegal scores at the legal implementation impact level and for the different indicators. Now here, for example, if you take effective, let's say, inclusive decision-making processes, number 7, we see that Senegal at legal level and at implementation impact level scores very well, 75 out of 100. But then again, as I said previously, on diverse tenure systems at the legal level, they don't score very well. They only have 30. This can be further disaggregated. We can disaggregate these data here again for Senegal according to the respondents, whether the respondents are government, civil society, research, or private sector. So here we disaggregate this ecosystem and see, well, if we look into this thematic, and this thematic here is about inclusive decision-making. If you look at the state, what does the state say, or what the state data say, or what does civil society say, what does research say, etc. Similar exercise can be done. Here I took Peru because we had it available, but the strength of the legal framework here being disaggregated according to tenure system. And here we look at the private rights, women land rights, community land rights, and indigenous peoples land rights, and how secure are these according to the law. Here you can see private land rights are considered very secure, whereas community land rights much less, according to the different actors that have, from whom we have used the data. Now, this brings me to the second part. Now that you understand a bit what LANDex is, the second part is about the relationship LANDex, Prindex, and these other global initiatives. This relationship, as you will see, allows us to do quite a lot of things and to respond to all these other frameworks. Not only LANDex per se is interesting, its relationships makes it interesting to respond, well, to use other initiatives, but to respond also to these SDGs, to the VGTs, to MELA, etc. So as I said, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. Some of the data, some of the indicators did not have data or did not exist out there. So we developed methodologies and collected data and are collecting data for these indicators. But many others we collect from others. Thank you, Odas. And here is the example. I'm not going to go through, it's much too detailed. In a nutshell, we have 22 indicators that correspond to the SDGs, 19 to the VGTs, 7 to the land matrix, 7 others to GLI, a whole other set of indicators. Here again, all the SDGs we cover from SDG 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 10, 13, 15, 16, and 17. And actually for SDG 16, which is a human rights one, LANDex is the official data source. Here again for the VGTs, 7 VGTs we cover. Here is an agglomeration of all. Here I also show MELA. 13 of the MELA indicators are covered by LANDex. 5 of our indicators we use Prindex data. It is 1B, 1C, 3C, 4C, and 5C. So there, the Prindex data, we use it to respond to these indicators. SDG 1.4 is the one that Prindex covers the best and the one that we use to respond to the SDGs. And here I show you very nicely our score for for a particular country. This is Nepal, is 85. And for this, we used only the Prindex data. So it gives you a very nice idea how Prindex data, through a more broader framework like LANDex and a global framework like LANDex, we can disaggregate and use other initiatives to respond to an SDG and provide alternative data sources than the mainly state-led SDGs. So by strengthening the collaboration and by strengthening this alignment between different initiatives, we ensure the visibility of land in the SDGs and other major frameworks. We also highlight the diversity of perspectives and legitimize the data ecosystem around land and bring tools, data, and indicators together towards a common goal. This alignment allows us to use data, but also then to respond to these indicators of the SDGs, the VGTs, and MELA. I will stop it here. I think I'm still in my time with us. I think I made my point clear. So these initiatives like Prindex and there's others out there, as I've shown, we have a huge set of collaborations and alignments that we worked out over the 5 years, allows us to bring together a strong ecosystem that is legitimate at the various levels and that contributes to the various frameworks out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Swat. I think what is interesting about LANDex is that it kind of summarizes different tools into one that can be useful also at country level. And I just want to mention that this tool is being very helpful at the country level, where our members working as in my stakeholder platforms are applying it to collect data on how land governance is doing in different countries, and we look forward to seeing the results in the coming months and years. One of our member-led platforms has commissioned a study that was actually looking at all these tools. I guess one of participants here might ask about all these tools and how they work together and how one can go about using one or the other. So there was a study about comparing all different tools and it would probably be interesting also to read that study, and the study was looking at each tool and looking at strengths and of each tool and where each tool can be more useful than the other, and each actually indeed each tool can be more useful than the other in a given setting. And I think the good thing is, as we say, information is power, and the more we can collect information on how land governance is doing, on how land security is doing, the more we can we can act on it, and I think the more power we have to act on addressing the land insecurity that the Prindex report has just revealed, as Brahima has shared in his presentation. We are 5 minutes late now as I speak. I will go to the next panelist, before that, I will introduce him. The next panelist will be telling us about linking this work of land data to global processes. How does land data talk to global processes? And this is Dr. Malcolm. He's a multidisciplinary land resource specialist with 25 years of global experience, including urban and rural property rights and strategy for managing critical global ecosystems. He was a senior land administration specialist in the World Bank. Currently, Malcolm is co-founder of the Global Land Alliance and is a co-director of Prindex, a joint initiative together with the Overseas Development Institute. He will tell us about how Prindex methodology and data can contribute in tracking SDGs, mainly in land sector. Dr. Malcolm, welcome, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ades. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity. Thanks everybody for tuning in this year of the webinar. I would just like to make a few comments, and I think we can give some time back about linking the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the voluntary guidelines for the governance of tenure of land, forest, and fisheries, the VGGTs, into the discussion here about data in Africa. Constructs like the SDGs and the VGGTs are frameworks which seek to bring global standards and global norms to bear on national and local processes. Indicators such as Prindex and many, many others can potentially become mechanisms for monitoring these and thus creating milestones of transparency and accountability for governments, citizens, and international organizations. But these indicators, these frameworks, and these milestones are ultimately only as valuable as the substantive commitments and the actual progress which they seek to support. Unfortunately, the pandemic has really thrown, I think, a harsh light onto these constructs, revealing how truly vulnerable the global system is to systemic shocks and how quickly progress that has been made can be lost. The SDG 2020 report, in fact, is of quite a pessimistic read. Let me quote a few bullets from that report. An estimated 71 million people worldwide are expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020, the first rise in global poverty since 1998. Lost income, limited social protection, and rising prices mean that even those who were previously secure could find themselves at risk of poverty and hunger, and at risk of eviction and loss of land and property. Underemployment and unemployment due to the crisis mean that some 1.6 billion already vulnerable workers in the informal economy, half the global workforce, may be significantly affected, with their incomes estimated to have fallen by 60% in the first month of the crisis. and more than 1 billion slum dwellers worldwide have been placed acutely at risk from the effects of COVID-19, suffering from a lack of adequate housing, no running water, shared toilets, little or no waste management, overcrowded public transport, and limited access to formal healthcare. Women and children are among those bearing the heaviest brunt of the pandemic's effect. And yet, I think that somebody has said that, you know, in every crisis is an opportunity. And I think it's therefore critical for the land community, the property rights communities of practice to see this opportunity. And, you know, even though it's become already a cliche, I think this build it back better is an important critical element. And I hope that we are learning some lessons from the pandemic that can make our commitments, investments, and plans better moving forward. Indicators like Prindex are a small but important part of this effort. If we can track progress, we should be able to say where policies are working, where they are standing still or backsliding. We should be able to create targets, and we should be able to promote a type of race to the top or positive competition among countries and organizations working in the space. Prindex is certainly not a sufficient indicator for this whole task. It needs to be part of a full suite of supply side, demand side, and other types of data to understand what is happening. But I believe it's an important element and a valuable baseline for the post-COVID world. And I think it's valuable that the current sets of Prindex data were mostly collected just prior to the pandemic. But these indicators really need to be deployed in the service of local agendas and interpreted in terms of local realities. And so we welcome the opportunity to develop collaboration with local activists, with local researchers across the continent to bring these into better focus. I think that we can use the SDG and the VGGT frameworks as overarching constructs to unite groups. Those, and so I mean talking about uniting the land group with those working on broader issues of poverty, on shelter and right to the city, on women's rights, on climate, on conflict, and create this linkage of the land agenda with these more strongly than has been so far to the case. Of course, reporting is very important. But we know from the great work of the SDG Land Momentum Group, of which ILC, Oxfam, Landesa are the leaders, that so far not a single country has reported yet on the SDG land indicator 1.4.2. I think importantly, a couple of high income countries, the United States and the United Kingdom, have both made decisions to utilize the newly available Prindex data for their future reporting on this indicator after determining that there are no existing national systems for collecting data on perception of tenure security. And we hope that Prindex will be a help for more governments across the continent. So I would just like to say that I think we need to prioritize, focus on how to use the SDGs and the VGGTs now as a framework and a reference point for pivoting out of the shock of the pandemic into a new standard, higher expectations, and building this web of commitments between government, citizens, and international organizations on a much stronger basis. Probably this requires an order of magnitude greater investment. It requires breaking down traditional silos in governance and development policy and demanding much more of governments and others. This is only going to come through organization, mobilization, political activism. And I think that ILC and its members and the panelists today are showing and leading the way in many cases on how to do this. There's an old saying that all land issues are local, and there's another old saying that all politics are local. And I think that local actors will always be on the front lines of the battles for secure land and shelter and livelihoods, but that regional and global coalitions and commitments like the SDGs, the VGGTs, and other regional ones like the MELA program, and their indicators can improve their chance of success if we work closely together. Thank you, and back to you, Odessa.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think I was muted. I think you ended on an interesting note. Policies are local, but global processes are key in influencing local policies. And definitely the revelations of the Prindex reports are very meaningful in terms of where the pandemic is hurting harder, and this should mean a lot in terms of what COVID response priorities should be. And I think this is really a key takeaway point. I'm happy that you used the rest time, so we saved 3 minutes from the 5 minutes we had lost. Good. So we are actually done with panelists, but before I go to the questions that we have received in the question and answer box, I have 3 discussants that I want to receive before I open for I share the questions with the panelists for you to answer. But I have 3 discussants who will answer a few questions for me before we read the questions and go to the closure of the conference. The first discussant is Ruth Minja, and I have a question for her, but I will first of all introduce her. Ruth is a principal statistician and the director responsible for population census and social statistics at the National Bureau of Statistics in Tanzania. She is also a national coordinator and a focal person for data for monitoring SDGs and regional and national development frameworks. Currently, she's a member of the IAEG SDGs and a chair of the UN Experts Group on Environmental Statistics. So, Ruth, what is the role of national statistic offices in collecting land data, and how land issues are mainstreamed into the official data collection? What have you done in Tanzania? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Thank you, moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, moderator and the coordinators for inviting Tanzania to share experience on land data. The National Bureau of Statistics in Tanzania is mandated to produce and to coordinate the production and dissemination of official statistics within the national statistical system. NBS is also responsible for coordinating data availability for monitoring SDGs and the other regional and the national development frameworks. Tanzania recognizes that secure land rights is the key factor for achieving sustainable development. This includes eradication of poverty and hunger, protection of human rights, environment, and climate change. In order to better inform policies on land issues, NEBS has been working in close collaboration with its stakeholders within and outside the country, such as Ministry of Land, Housing, and Human Settlement Development, the Global Land Alliance based in the US, the UK-based Overseas Development Institute, and the UN Habitat to conduct the 2018 baseline survey on property rights and tenure security using the Global Property Right Index, the pre-index initiative. The findings for this survey are useful as a benchmark in monitoring land rights and tenure security in the country in response to SDG 1.4.2. Tanzania, in collaboration with UN Women, in addition, is in the process of conducting the first survey on social institution and gender index, of which among the key indicators is the status of property rights and the ownership of resources, including lands. The government of Tanzania therefore invites development partners and the other interested partners to support these initiatives in the country to ensure timely and sustainable data production mechanisms for monitoring land-related SDG indicators, and specifically to inform policymakers in making evidence-based decisions on land rights and tenure reforms to ensure no one is left behind in a sustainable development process. Over to you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for sharing the experience of Tanzania on run data. We have a platform, a stakeholder platform in Tanzania, which is surely benefiting from those efforts. Without delaying, I will invite the second discussant. And this time she will tell us about data and women land rights. But before that, I will introduce her. She's Mrs. Esther Mumilo. She's an ardent believer of grassroots women power and capacities. Esther is currently heading the Global Women Land Rights portfolio at the International Coalition. She's also leading the establishment of the Leadership Center for Transformative Development, Uongozi Center Africa, an institute aimed at scaling up bottom-up approaches that empower local communities and development practitioners to end gender inequality and sustainably transform lives across the continent and beyond. So, Esther, how data can push forward the women land rights and advocacy agenda? How land security for women can be affected in case of divorce or death of a spouse? Can you tell us more about these issues?
Thank you, Odas, and thank you, everyone. It's been a great pleasure to be in this meeting, and it's been illuminating to hear the wonderful results from the Prindex work, and of course from other presentations that have been done. And I think I've been asked to focus on the situation of women land rights in marriage. And I think it's good to underscore that there is a correlation between the way marriages in Africa and the way land rights in Africa are held by women. So we've been told by statistically that approximately 12% of women in Africa own land individually. Therefore, almost all the rest, they own land collectively. A majority of the land that women use in Africa is held at the customary law. And it is in the customary law and land practices that where women's ability to access, control, and own is very limited. And when during the time of marriage, women access land, access other assets through their husband. Once that marriage is dissolved, they have no control over that land, or they have no control other assets. And we've also been told that the perception, of course, of women in, for example, Eastern Africa, in on how they own land or they don't control land, influences their decision. And this is true for everywhere else. And unfortunately, the continent has been guided by many laws and policy frameworks. For example, we have the Maputo Protocol. The Maputo Protocol, which is popularly known as Maputo Protocol, but it's actually the protocol to the African Charter on Human and Rights. And it really is very good on rights of women in Africa. It details out in the Article 7 of this protocol, it calls for non-discriminatory of men and women. It affirms that the equality between women and men, and how properties and assets should be used and shared, either if there is separation or divorce. And you know, in Africa, only 3 countries that have not actually ratified or signed this protocol. And it's only 10 countries that have signed and have not ratified, meaning all other countries have ratified and have signed. So where is the problem? The problem is there is a big difference between the policies and the legal frameworks we have in Africa and the practices. And this is where the use of data, like what we have been introduced to this morning, matters a lot. We have been told that Prindex is about the perception. So if women have the perception that they hold the rights to that, then they'll use it for better decision making. And it's not just the women, it also the community and their families. If they perceive that women who live with them have better decision making, or they have better rights to the land, they'll make better decisions that will be useful for families. So what should we do in moving forward? I would say 3 things. That it is necessary that we empower rural women, the indigenous women, the grassroots women to understand crystal clear their status of land. And that is why we need this kind of alternative data sets that supports women to collect their own feeling about security of land tenure. So empowering them to use these data sets. And then the other thing is empowering them to use the information that they collect to be able to influence decision-making within their own families and at the community level, even before we go to the national level. We've been told none of the country in Africa or none of the country in the world has reported on the SDGs related to land data or land indicators. Therefore, we need an alternative way of influencing governments to make decisions. And what we should do, and this is more a call to development partners, we need to put more resources in the hands of local community to be able to do better advocacy. And the third thing is taking the momentum, taking the advantage of the current momentum. We are heading into an arena where the world is going to develop 5 years action plans. The Beijing Platform for Action, the review of Beijing Platform for Action, the generation equality is going to give us an outcome. And this outcome is 5 years action plans, 2021, 2026. These action plans are going to guide the world on how they are going to continue closing the gender inequality gap. They are going to show us how to empower women and how to fulfill women's human rights. And what is necessary is we need to use any strategy that is available to make sure that women's land rights is mainstreamed in these action plans. And those are the 3 critical things that I would bring forward, others.
Thank you very much. So I think one thing which is always coming back is to empower rural women. I was in another meeting, the IGAD session this morning, and I heard that someone challenged this term, women empowerment. What do you think about it? We can give you 1 minute for that.
Yes, I actually, and increasingly, I think as I get my tentacles across international, remember I've always worked at the grassroots for 25 years, and now I'm in the International Lad Coalition, and I'm working with serious technical member staffs that are serious about advancing women's land rights. Names and terms don't matter. And I think we need to unpack the spirit behind our naming and the naming and the terms we use. So I agree, oftentimes I use enhancing capacities of grassroots women, because that means that you already come to the platform knowing that the communities and recognizing they have their capacity. But truth be told, they need their capacity to be enhanced.
Very good. And sometimes it's also a matter of like removing some non-conducive factors. Great. We have let us discuss and then we'll answer a few questions before crossing. The last but not least discussion is going to help us actually with a kind of wrap-up question, and she's I will probably not pronounce her name correctly, but she's Professor Taibat. Yes, I hope I have pronounced it very well. And she's an associate professor of urban planning at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, where she's leading the Pro-Poor Development Research Cluster, and serves as co-director at the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development. So, Professor, is there a need for disaggregated data? What are you doing in capturing local dynamics in Nigeria? Over to you, Professor.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by saying that global data tells us the what of the problem, and disaggregated data tells us why the problem is the way it is. What global data does is to give us a bird's eye view, and oftentimes it doesn't drill down into the specific nuances and the contextualizations of the problem. And it is in these nuances and contextualizations that the solutions really are. So take, for example, the issue of women. We know that women are vulnerable when it comes to land rights. But what the kind of work that we do in Lagos tells us is that female-headed households are particularly challenged. And even women who are not heads of households are challenged. And this affects socioeconomic outcomes for their children. It affects education outcomes for their children. Women who suffer forced eviction in particular communities, have to now compromise with regards to the advancement of their children. So in the past few months, we've been looking at whether COVID is a factor in land vulnerability in Lagos, and also to determine the kinds of typologies of land vulnerability there are. We know in Lagos, everybody has some form of land vulnerability. It depends on your socioeconomic status and oftentimes your location in the city. So a slum that is not on the waterfront is relatively more stable or more secure, more land secure than a slum that's along the waterfront. And why is that? Because of the land value and the interest of the elite, in waterfront communities, particularly over the last 20 years. So while we cast a general lens on Lagos, we could say that Lagos is generally secure. But when we drill down, we then discover that communities at the waterfront are the most insecure. And so solutions to land insecurity in Lagos must take into consideration the specific dynamics of these locations at the waterfront. Another thing that we have done is to understand, whether migration patterns, have an effect on land vulnerability. The Prindex report tells us that renters are generally more insecure. Our studies have discovered that internally displaced people who are fleeing their homes and coming into the city for survival are even more insecure than renters. So they pay like renters, but because they have their citizenship status is somewhat precarious, they suffer more vulnerability. We have seen experiences of communities that were displaced after paying for rent, the space, paying rent on a space for a year, and they were displaced overnight. And they are afraid to go to the police because they are IDPs and they are not sure of their citizenship status. And so, these kinds of nuances are not in the general data. They are not in the large data sets. If we're going to protect the most vulnerable, then we must be aware of the specific challenges that these most vulnerable face, whether it's their socioeconomics, whether it's their politics, whether it's their everyday life. We discovered also that many of the women in these communities, particularly the female heads of households, have diverted their savings and their trading capital to survival during COVID-19. And so many of them are desperate and redundant now that the lockdown has been lifted. How do they pay rent? All right, so homelessness is staring them in the face. How do they access, and with a system where there's a weak welfare system, how do they, take care of their children? Many of them are even afraid to go to seek welfare from the state, except from the charitable agencies who come into the communities. And then these charitable agencies only go into certain communities. They don't go into the squatter settlements, all right? And then there are people in those squatter settlements that have higher need. So the situation in Lagos is such that one needs to understand the nuances in any location that one is looking at. The general data is good for broad assumptions, but if we're actually going to tackle the land governance issues, then we must have contextualized data. We must take data at the community level, because even within a city, experiences differ, realities differ, and pathways to security are very different. We discovered in one of the communities that they observed that there is power in number. So they decided to collapse their 3 communities into one large community to negotiate with government. So they've been able to mobilize and organize, and then they sent a petition to the government to, get them onto the pathway to securing tenure. And they've had a couple of meetings, all right, because they were able to organize and mobilize themselves because they understand the power in numbers. So the agency of these communities in strengthening their land tenure and also important is to capture what the literature says. There are lots of researchers that are doing work on these different aspects of land across the continent, but we're not bringing all these data together. We're not bringing all this work that is being done together to kind of understand what the landscape really says. So what we did was to look at all the data, all the papers that had been published since 2000 on land in Lagos. We're able to get about 53 papers after drilling down to specific issues of land reforms and land creation. And there are clear, issues that are emerging. First, the gender issue. Second, the issue of location. Third, the issue of the land administration process itself is problematic. A lot of the international funding is going into establishing GIS, but that very same GIS is good in itself because it kind of removes the human angle, but it has also left so many behind. What about those people whose lands are not registered? What about those people who are not even educated or literate enough, to go online to start the process? So these are some of the issues that one needs to look at. We need to have disaggregated data, and we also need to bring together the research, the practice, and the development communities to sit at the table and collaborate more. So I stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor has just confirmed that disaggregated data are very important because from global to national, then you find very specific differences when it comes to specific groups. Comrades, they also have their own differences, whether they are, let's say, internal displaced people, they have their own differences. We have seen also other usual groups. We know women have their own particularities. We know youth have their particular issues. So disaggregated data it's a very important I think aspect to consider as we develop data tools and as we work on these kind of reports. We've heard from all our panelists and all the discussants, and I think this is now time to go through the questions that were just shared. I will read a few questions and invite panelists to answer them before we close. There was one very Rahima, you will help me because some of the questions have gone, at least from my side. Huh?
No, yeah, the questions have been answered in the chat, but you can certainly read them and we can answer them live as well if we want to go into more details. Which question? I will try to read it.
I was to come back to Michelle because she said she was not okay with the figure on Cameron. They wanted Marcon and Ibrahima to comment on that.
Ibrahima, could you read that, as my French pronunciation isn't going to be up to scratch? Would you mind reading that?
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Michelle was saying that in the figures we said for Cameroon is a 32 person of insecurity, but she says for the case of Cameroon, maybe it's a bit high because 80% of the affairs that are pending at the court are related to land. Of course, this is something true. Sometimes the rates can be less than what we see on the field, but I think also Prindex is trying now to address this issue, and as Professor Taibat said, we are collecting data at a very local level to be able to capture those local dynamics, and I think this is something a way for us to learn from the past and how to improve the Prindex methodology and other. I may leave it to Malcolm to elaborate more on that. Malcolm.
Yeah, I mean so the figure for Cameroon, like the other national figures, represents a national average, which is based on sampling of geographic units in proportion to their population. So what we see for each country it represents a single data point which averages respondents from across the entire country, weighted by their share of the population. So it's completely possible that there are hotspots of very high insecurity or places of very low insecurity, which are in a sense masked by this national average. We would certainly be interested to to follow up the question in detail and to try to follow up about how we could make the estimates and understand the full situation in Cameroon better. But we could take that offline through Ibrahima and myself.
Great. I realize most of the questions have been answered through the chat. We still have 7 minutes before the closure remarks. There was an interesting question about how do we define ownership. It was already answered by Malcolm, but probably Malcolm, you can talk about it for those who did not read your answer.
Yeah, so ownership is self-defined, so it's perceived ownership. We, in the Prindex methodology, an adult, randomly selected adult responds for each home site that is sampled. And in Africa, these are all face-to-face interviews, mostly carried out as a sub-module in the Gallup World Poll. And so in the interview, then the respondent is asked what their, if they're an owner, if they are a family member of an owner, if they are a renter of staying with permission, or if they have a different relationship. Like now, they also ask about the documentation, and there are, for each country, there are options about the types of documents which are localized according to the prevalent documents in that types in that country and in the local language. So those are the, we don't request to see the documents or to confirm the documents. So these are both the ownership status and the documentation status are both based on the respondent's recall. We do think that this methodology is quite valuable for women's land rights because instead of interviewing only a household head, which has been often a traditional way of conducting these kind of surveys, that by asking for a random adult, we also get a representation of women in the household. Back to you, Others.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Michael. I will now proceed to the closure of the conference. I think it was a great event as far as I'm concerned. We went through a very good series of presentations. I will ask every panelist to take 1 minute or less to say a final word, and then Malcolm will take more than 1 minute to close the conference. Let's start from Ibrahima, who just shared with us the report, and tell us, Ibrahima, what can people take in 1 or 2 or 3 words from the report?
Okay, thank you, Others. Thank you, Others. I have shared some key findings from the report, but you can have access to the paper on the chat box. I think Ryan has already shared it. So I think this study is very interesting, as now we are jumping into a new way of thinking, a new way of doing in terms of putting together public policies. Now this approach of evidence-based policy. Whatever we do, when we have to design policies, we need to base them on accurate data, on validated data, on data to ensure that the result is the one that we expect. I think this is what I want to share. And then for the audience, if you have for any question or follow-up, I'm available to respond to you and engage with you further on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahima. To Dr. Clement, I actually once again realize the land sector is a small family. When Clement was presenting, I remembered that Clement's project was designed when it was designed, Ibrahima told me about it, and I remember sometime Ibrahima was asking me permission to go to work with Clement on that project, and I was asking Ibrahima whether it's the same project that Clement is talking about. And,
yeah. This is another hat that I'm wearing.
It's a small family, so I realize I have been working with Clement indirectly. Clement, it's nice to see Continental Body really actively working on run data, and for us in sometime IRC is not even sure whether we are not the civil society, we are not a government organization, we are in between. So but for us being in between, it's for us a very good and very encouraging to see a Continental Body actively investing in data, because it makes very easy the job of our members when member states are equipped, and where do you see us heading moving forward? Is Kerem there? Oh, I think he has left. Kerema? It seems Kerema has left for some reason. So if he is back, I will ask him the question, but otherwise I go to Dr. Wad, my colleague from the International Land Coalition. Wad, you talked about LANDex, a tool that I know a bit about. I think LANDex has a particularity to be kind of connecting a bit of different tools. What would you respond to actors who are confused about different data tools in the land sector?
Thank you, Das. Thank you. I think it's important to leave no one behind. I think that's the motto of the SDGs, and that's certainly the motto of our contemporary times. Inequality, marginalization, etc., is very important. So leaving no one behind is of utmost importance for us. That means in the land sector covering women's land rights, we've heard it, covering IPLC, indigenous peoples and local community lands, covering collective rights, covering the different tenure systems, etc., etc. I think that this can only be done through better collaboration, better coordination and alignment between all these different initiatives. LANDex has started doing that, but that's only a beginning. We need to do more. We need to bring all these together, probably at regional level, because at global level might be a bit complicated. But here, what I hear through this panel this panel we just had, is that there's a willingness not only by those presenting the tools like Prindex or LANDex and some others, but also by our politics and by our regional institutions like IGAD, African Union, and others. So I would suggest for all of us to continue this discussion. Would hope that this brings us in a little regional dynamic here, and that we can sit together and talk on how to valorize all these initiatives that are very valuable into a more coordinated way into these regional institutions. Thank you, Adas.
Thank you very much, Wad. I want to thank all participants on my behalf and on behalf of the International Coalition. Before I invite Maricon to close officially this conference, because after him I will not talk. Over to you, Maricon.
Okay, thank you, Adas, and thank you all panelists and all participants for sharing time together to discuss these important issues. Let me just try to say, I think, 5 points that I would take away today. One is that I think the overall data situation on land in Africa is improving, it's maturing. We see now more information available about more places in more ways. LANDex, Prindex, MELA, Tanzania, but I think the overall take-up and utilization of this data is still relatively weak. I think what AU and NEPAD is doing is crucial in this respect to try to get governments to utilize it better. As everyone has talked about, we're now under the shadow of the pandemic and how that is changing the land situation, both in some ways creating new opportunities, but also creating many new problems. I think this reflects in this need to go even more disaggregated, understanding the real nuances of specific places and how coalitions can be made to solve the interlinked problems of land, livelihoods, environment in places. Women are crucial to that equation. They're under served and disempowered across the continent. That is clearly a priority. And to make progress, we need this deeper collaboration. We need to get out of our silos, and we need to create the kind of political and organizational force which can actually leverage these changes. And I think the hopeful view of the post-pandemic is that this is that the crisis creates opportunity. We will continue to work on this. We want to follow up with people and look for more collaboration on each of these fronts. And with you all, I think we do represent the community of practice collectively who can help to bring about these changes. And with that, I will thank everybody and adjourn the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.